That's one. This. I tried to be, but not my, your strength. Wherever you're comfortable, you know. Okay, so this is the one from last. Just find out. Anybody need anything last week?
I need not.
Settlement.
I have the twelve. What is today's?
Today is 19. That's my phone. She has. Oh, here, the 19th century total ministry. Yeah, just find out who did it. All right. So wait, you were not here last week. So here's the pale settlement. And then who called you? If they just leave a message, it wasn't important. Okay, we're going to do today, we're going to start the sheet. It says on top, the Pale Settlement, Economic and Social Life. We had started it last week. Does everybody have a copy of that? Hopefully.
Yes.
Everybody's got a copy of that one. Okay, then the next one we're going to start, we'll say 19th century told me, so it starts with the malka. You don't have it, so I'll pass them out to Carter. Okay, so let me get my sheet. We had definitely started the Pale Settlement. This was the one you found so humorous, how the population grew so fast. So let's start with that. Wait a minute, I gotta switch classes. So now the better to see me. My regular classes, okay. Where do I pick this sunglasses? You know, oh. I guess the way they were up, I didn't quite see them. All right. So I'm pretty sure we finished page 1, correct?
Yeah.
And we should be now on page 2. All right, we were talking about how some of the Jews earned their livelihood in the Pale Settlement. All right, and now we will continue there. Okay, did I do that first paragraph? I don't think so. I think I started the first paragraph on page 2. No,
You did about reproducing.
no, that's the beginning. That's all right. So page 1, right? That talked about how the population grew so tremendously, from like 1 million up to over 5 million by the end of the century. Then we talked how active the Jews were in commerce, how they dominated the liquor trade. And you looking for an extra? No, good. I'm trying to think where I have the extra here. Yes. And we found this. I found that so interesting. The fact that they sort of got into the liquor trade. First of all, they didn't own their own land, and, you know, but that it was easier to purchase, you know, the wheat or whatever you make the liquor out of. That's hops, right? I don't know. In any case, which is certainly can, you know, can't always be preserved to get moldy. So they transferred that and made that into liquor, and that was a, you know, liquor was wine can. I once had like an old bottle of wine. Oh, not good. But liquor will last for many, many years. So that's how they got into that liquor business. Do you need some more?
Yeah.
I have one over here. I don't know if I have.
Oh, you have an extra?
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. What else we talk here? Then so as a result, they became tavern keepers. And then they said that a lot of them were what we call tax farmers, that they were used to collect the taxes. Because that is not yet very beloved, right? And they said definitely had a monopoly. It said collection of the liquor excises. But in 1861, this is the very end of that paragraph, it says the Russian government took over the sale and distribution of liquor. And so there still are some Jewish innkeepers, but thousands of Jewish wholesalers, tax agents, distillers, and company agents soon were forced into other occupations. And again, remember we had talked about the Haskalah and some of the early writers, and they were writing in Hebrew. And I do remember reading some of those stories, in Hebrew. And they talk about the tavern keeper, selling the liquor, so it was a very, very common operation. But you saw starting here in the 1860s, that's taken away from them. So there's no longer, now they have to look for other avenues of income. Now we're going to talk about how some of the wealthier ones and what occupations they run into. So that second paragraph, so on page 2, the second paragraph. So again, so now they want to invest. So they do have money to invest because they had been in that liquor business, which I guess was pretty profitable. So those Jews. Now we're not talking about those in the Pale. Those basically are, they remained pretty poor. But those who remember, Alexander II at a certain point earlier, claim, did open up the borders of the Pale again to the wealthier Jews. So we already alluded to what I'm about to tell you, but what occupations did they go into? Those who went into what's called interior Russia. Okay. And first of all, this is all taking part, certainly in Western Europe. This is time period of the Industrial Revolution, right? When things are going to expand and industry is going to come to the fore, and that may be then the many means of occupation. It says, so a lot of the Jewish capital was then used into making the railroad system. Says, and I have here the names of some of them: the Polakofs, the Cronenbergs, the Nathansons. Plus, they had to do it in conjunction with some bankers. And one was the Afrosian Company, and one was Rafalovich's and the Gunsbergs. And they were Russia's most prominent railroad tycoons. And I think from one of the other, it says it even here. They accounted for the construction of 3/4 of the railroads throughout Russia. Because again, this is a time period of expansion. They did have the capital, and again in conjunction with the bankers. And this is how they became quite wealthy. Some of these people.
It's one of the biggest countries in the world.
Yeah. They were very proud of their railroad system. So again, they had the most available liquid capital. That means they had, access to funds, actual money, and the best international connections. And that's the whole thing, among Jewish people, that, we always have connections, right? You can go someplace and right away, you can make friends, you meet, fellow Jews. What are you reading for?
It's not the Pale settlements, what are we reading?
Yes, I'm reading on page 2. It's the Pale settlement. It says economic and social life. So you don't have it. Do you have another
You
copy?
need that too?
No, it says it is the Pale settlement, but it's economic and social life.
If you're reading it.
Yes. All right, so you take that.
You don't need it?
All right.
I can't read it so well.
Okay, so he's gonna just listen to it. Okay, all right, thank you. And obviously I need my copy, for myself, all right? All right, so there are no more any extra copies of anything lying around, just wanted to make sure. Okay, fine. If you want, if you want, we could go to the office and she'll run off extra copies. If you want. Shomagli?
כן, יש לי את זה. את זה יש לי, אבל אין לי את מה שהיה לפני.
But you haven't been here for a while.
כן, נכון. נכון, היה לי
It's so now in the second.
Second page, all right. Second page, I'm in that top paragraph, but towards the end of that. Okay. Again, we talked about the Jews are so involved now in railroad building. They have connections. They would be the international connections. Obviously, would be through Jews in France, Jews in Germany, Jews in England. Wherever that central, Europe, that would be in Vienna and Prague. This is how they're making their connections. All right. And again, we told you because they had the most available liquid funds, and they had these connections, all right? All right, oh yeah, and I left out Berlin, Paris, obviously, and Warsaw. Okay, so I'm in the next paragraph, all right? You're paying attention, okay? I'm in this paragraph here, the next one. I'm still on page 2, but I'm on the next paragraph. Okay, it says for the same reasons, easy access again to capital, advantageous international relationships. Jews were able to lay the basis for modern Russian banking. I mean, Russia up until this time is pretty backward, so, it's the Jews, are saying, saying, right? I mean, there was money in Russia. It's not like nobody, there was certainly very wealthy noblemen, but I don't know, they didn't have the inclination, or the know-how, to really expand business and take advantage of the changes that were happening in the world. It says beginning in 1859 in St. Petersburg, where St. Petersburg was the capital. Okay? Baron Horst established the foundations of one of the largest investment banking systems in Russia. The second largest bank in the capital was that of Meyer. And in Warsaw, the lending bankers in the second half of the century, okay, were the Wallenbergs, the Cronenbergs, and the Frankels. So their descendants, perhaps, these are names I'm sure you've heard of. And in Odessa, remember I told you how Odessa was a sleepy little nothing town, until the beginning of the 19th century. But then they finally realized that this is a port, to export, especially because a very large grain export. So, but it was as for the Jews who started moving into there, a lot of them were the more modern type of Jews, and so the Haskalah had a real foothold, in the in Odessa, and again, if you read it in any Hebrew literature, some people will talk about the fact that this was like a hotbed, it became some radicals, it's very interesting. And today, I mean, Odessa still is, large port, and I'm sure you've read articles in the paper about, how Russia was interfering, right, with their ability to export the grain from Ukraine. Okay, now this is interesting. It says in Odessa, it says the Afrosi Bank played a crucial role in sorry, it should be says grain, the grain export trade. This family, first of all, there's a family actually called Effusi that became extremely wealthy in France. So even though it says Effusi here, I think it's the same family. I don't know if you ever read the book, The Amber and the Hair. It's about they were no longer observant, Jews anymore, but they became very, very wealthy, and they lived. One of the families lived in, but they had their beginnings right in the grain thing. So I have a feeling it's really the same family.
No, it's Ashkenaz.
Yeah.
Didn't have
Yeah.
any in his story.
Thing is,
Russia didn't have.
parts of Russia,
No, it
below, are like.
Well, it depended, right? where
Tajikistan, all those.
Yeah, well, that's
Yeah.
actually more
But
to the
that's
east.
further.
That's to the east.
Nothing to do with this.
So any case, I love that book. It's called The Amber and the Hair. Came out a number of years ago. It's about what's the amber in the hair? First we started reading it. How did it get this title? It was a man who is talking about one of the wealthy members of the Effusi family who collected like these little carvings, like they're Japanese. So that's what the amber was making in their eyes, and the hair made a rabbit, So and whatever, it just it was very. I found it to be quite fascinating. Okay, so now we talked about the railroads, the banking, okay? There also said, talks about the 1870s, the Holocaust, they founded the Moscow Agrarian Bank. And then there was the Moscow International, Don Agrarian. And as of John, guys, all right. So they obviously opened up several different banks with different names. Says, and this is interesting, another area of Jewish investment was the sugar industry, not sugar cane, which you find like in the Caribbean, or in, even Louisiana, that's when they imported all the black slaves,
Florida.
Yes, some, right, here. But there was made out of beets, okay? The Jews pioneered in the purchase of beet crops. And so it seems odd, right? I mean, I don't know if any of you eat beets, borscht. I once had a babysitting job with some people on the east side. They lived in this very beautiful barn on Fifth Avenue. And they paid me very well. But they were at least a bit religious. But she felt bad that I couldn't eat anything. So she went and bought me borscht. I happen to hate borscht.
From a Russian, I understand borscht is the food.
I remember my mother, I could smell it in the house. And, ugh, she was,
I had a lot of borscht.
but it's definitely, yeah, my mom also put sour, some people put other things. Anyways, but this is how from these same beets, they were making sugar, all right? And they bought it from the estates, it says, the Russian aristocracy. But then they had their own refineries. Well, I don't know how you do it, but how you extract the sugar. I guess you boil it and.
I don't make a borscht.
No, I'm saying for how you make it sugar.
Beet
from-
sugar.
Of the 300, this is so interesting. Of the 300 Russian refineries, that is sugar refineries, in existence in 1914, 100 were owned by Jews. I mean, it's a huge number. We got a third of them, So obviously, I say, I guess it's more the we became very good business people. Now, the majority of Jews are dirt poor. But these are the ones who were able, they were of the wealthier class within the Pale. And then when they were able to get out of the Pale, wow, then they really expanded their businesses. Now we'll talk more about the poor people, probably where most of us are antecedents come from. Okay. Nevertheless, all right, some of that very, very last paragraph. For most of the Jews, right, living in the Pale, the term business hardly meant this kind of industrial or financial pioneers. They did earn an income, but how, right? Business there meant small shopkeeping and petty trade. These were the people, the peasants, even though they're theoretically were free, the serfs, but they're still like tied to the land. They're still working for the noblemen. The Jews were not involved in to try to force it on us, to go with agriculture. But it was not good, wasn't well suited for those Jews. So they go right into this heavy trade business, like the little shop units. Retail commerce was a term which the government applied to nearly half the inhabitants of the Pale. I mean, look at the millions of Jews then, living in the Pale, and this is how they own their living. It says this term, right, hardly described the turn of marginal existence. They were poor people, eked out by hundreds of thousands of miserable, impoverished people. It barely described the grocer, right, whose store was a rickety stall by the side of a dirt road. Or the clothing salesman who hawked the virtues of the cloth he carried on his back as he shuffled from door to door. I actually don't know. I'm on my one side, my Zayd-Hillel rabbi, so, I'm not sure just why, some of this business And then in addition, on my other Zetas, I don't even know what they did in New York, quite honestly, but I know when they, even when they came to America, you know, reason when I told you, make a look in the bathtub. Okay. Nor can the term an artisan. You know, I think of an artisan, we talk the thing about artists. You know, somebody's creating something very beautiful. Now, this term artisan describes, here, just a few examples. The wagoner. Oh, remember Tevye, right?
Sure.
Wagon, who slept in the stable with his lone emaciated horse, or the carpenter, who ate by the sufferance of the weed-strewn truck garden he cultivated behind his shack, nor the glazer, that's, you know, glass, who patched up windows, not with glass, but with wood planking and rags. So this is this miserable existence that most of our forefathers and mothers, you know, that's what I'm saying, you know, when, I mean, we know it's, we've sort of seen pictures, you know, post, you know, World War II, what these little tiny, you know, villages, you know, like, and how these benign Jews here, how they ended up hating the Jews, that they were the rich Jews.
Yeah, they're very rich.
Very upset, you know, but I guess, right, kids, right, they were earning very poorly as just, you know, for farmers, you know, were in the land for the noblemen. So compared to them, I guess.
Yeah.
And there were in each shtetl, perhaps, you know, one or two wealthier Jews, you know, they want to live in a bigger house, you know. But the bulk of the Jews there were really impoverished Jews. I can understand why eventually we'll learn why so many of them wanted out, you know, and why so many came to America. Okay, next paragraph there. Life in the Palace settlement, as indeed of all of Russia, was grudging and bitter. So this is, we're not talking about just for the Jews. We're talking about for the bulk of the population, regular Russians. Competition was keen and continual. The typical breadwinner, driven frantic in his efforts to provide for his family, undertook any kind of degrading and exhausting work. I mean, you know, can I know they had large families and you have to kind of feed them, and so really they would just take whatever, you know, with the fun. He bore, if necessary, the insults and the browbeating of the peasant. Again, this would be the anti-Semitic, you know, taunting, or the local magnate, you know, wealthy person, as long as his work led to at least a minimum degree of independence. Yet there were certain well-defined limits beyond which no self-respecting Jew would go. But within the Jewish community, there were certain standards, you know, that had to be followed. If a Jew kept a shop by which he earned his livelihood, no other Jew presumed to open a shop in its immediate proximity. And even here in America, you know, when I remember there was a bakery in Rochester, and somebody else wanted to open a bakery, you know, across the street, and they told them, no, you can't, you know, because then you're going to take away from the other individual. So, but this were all incorporated, you know, as I'm going now through Daf Yomi, I can see how sensitive they are, you know, how competition was something. I mean, there's always a measure of competition, but you can't be on top of somebody else. You know, everybody needs to earn a living. If a petty trader haggled with a peasant over the price of a bag of grain, no one else, however anxious he may have been for the profit intervened. All right, so they're saying, you know, like there's some sort of altercation with the peasant. And it's a Jewish person selling something. You know, another, again, halachically, another Jew could not interfere. It's like, oh, well, I'll sell it to you know, less. Encroachment, that's sort of just described, was considered a profoundly antisocial act. I mean, maybe all these things affect even how Jews, how white should be and behaving, you know, always with great consideration for others. And this could lead to ostracism from in the community. And that would mean, in theoretically, you could be put in Pharaoh, you know, if you didn't follow these social norms. Still the life of the Jew was immeasurably better than the life of the Russian peasant. Right, I guess compared to them,
Oh, much better.
right, you see wealth, even though it wasn't. Until the reign of Alexander III, that's 1881, if Uncle finally got his Jew born, yes, he was assassinated. Existence in the Pale remained tolerable. It was okay, it was miserable, but certainly it was anti-Semitism, taunting, interfering. But the notion of political or social protest was never seriously entertained. But then the revolutionary movement will come into, and a lot, I should say a lot, a number of Jews became involved in the revolutionary movement. So, certainly as the Communist Party gained adherence, later in the 1890s and into going into the 20th century, so many of the prominent, leaders were Jewish people. So like Trotsky, of course, somebody with an M. I don't know. I know there were Jewish Jews, but again, I think it's all from that because of that social ethic, where they were raised, about caring for the others, making sure that everybody, from each according to his ability, according to his work, that's famous communism. And it sounds very beautiful, Of course, the leaders ended up taking a lot for themselves, but theoretically, this is how it should have been. All right, and also in 1881, we'll get into it, of course. What happens is Alexander is assassinated. A czar comes up, his name's the third. There's a lot of revolutionary foment that's growing, and of course, who are they going to blame? It's the Jew. And that's when we're going to go into the country of those awful pogroms. Now, there were definitely attacks upon the Jews all along, But since, let's say, the Khmelnytsky uprising in 1648-49, there wasn't like that it's all over attack upon the Jews. But these pogroms now, starting in the 1800s. And it's then, well, I don't know what the history is about, but so many, over 1 million, or 1.5 million, Jews came to America because they wanted out of Russia. Okay? Yes, well, that's also the Zionist movement started. But I'm saying, as a large movement of people, it was to America, right? Some obviously opted for the Palestine, but we're not talking about such huge numbers. The largest group of people came to the United States. All right, now let's talk a bit about their religious life. I told you the majority of the Jews, until those who were influenced by the Haskalah, they sort of gave up a lot of their Jewish practice. They never denied their Judaism, unlike the members of the Enlightenment in Germany. Their thing was really to totally reject so much of their Jewishness. But in Russia, they never, the whole thing in Germany went through Mendelssohn and, and later people, even with reform movement, they were like so desirous of being accepted into their general community. They wanted to be considered as proud Germans. I don't think the Jews in Russia cared about being called proud Russians, because they knew the people, hated them, rejected them. So so even though maybe their level of observance, went down over time, but they still identified themselves as Jews. They weren't trying to convert, to something else. So, anyways, but that religious life played a vibrant, center in the Pale of Settlement. There were mostly very, very religious Jews who lived here. Some of those Jews, again, who got out of the Pale and became quite wealthy. Again, they still had their identity as Jews, but I don't know, their level of observance, probably dissipated over time. Not the Jews in the Pale. Okay, the chief sustaining influence. for the Jew was his religion. I mean, and that's how we identified ourselves. You're a Jew because of your religion, all right? The way you believe in God, the way you practice your religion, and you go to shul. I mean, all those things. What I had identified a Russian Jew. His piety dominated, suffused every aspect of his life, and I'm sure you're Orthodox. I mean, I never could make a differentiation between my Jewish self and, I mean, it's like it encompasses you completely, right? And your thought process, if you're going to do something. I don't know, I'm always thinking, but in Jewish terms.
They were first Jewish and then they were Poles. When Germany, they were to be first German.
Right. In later years, these voluntary committees, we've already referred to them, the Hevras, ensured that there were mezuzot on every Jewish doorpost. I guess there was like a committee that would go around checking Jewish worshipers wore their tefillin properly, and that women scrupulously attended the mitzvah once a month. Well, standing guard, and this was I had never heard of this before. So,
About the mix.
yeah, that they would keep track. Well, maybe the lady was already pregnant or something. I don't know. It's like ridiculous. Anyways, there were even boards of morals to direct and regulate private lives. Now, have some of you read Naomi Reagan's books? Yeah, I like her books very much. But she talks about these like morality squads, like in Mea Sharim and other areas where there are a lot of very, very frum Jews. And I remember discussing the book then with my daughter, and I said, "What?" And she said, "No, it's true. They do exist. That these people will go around checking your people. I guess like if your hem is the proper height, your sleeve length. I know. I walk through Maya Sharmin with my short sleeves and whatever." He said a word to me.
It's, a friend of mine walked through Mass ran with the wrong colored tipple. And he got yelled at. He's so brother.
Oh my God.
So you walk with your military outfit. That's
I
cool.
don't know. I guess they thought I was like beyond redemption.
You were six.
Whatever. But so apparently, just as unfortunately still exists, right? Certainly from neighborhoods, even in Israel today. I don't know, maybe it's in New York too, like that.
I heard the planning because of the children, they should go to yeshiva, they shouldn't go to the school that they have there, the public school, whatever.
Here in Israel, you thought?
No, I'm
Oh.
talking about Europe. At that time.
Oh.
The problem was the kids, they were very careful about the kids and to make sure that if they go to yeshiva.
But that would guarantee the continuity.
And if they don't go to yeshiva, to make sure that the Rebbe comes to the house and teaches them.
Right, so that.
So the value of the Jewish.
Oh,
faith
absolutely.
is very strong
It's
over there.
crucial,
This was
And-
Eastern Europe or Russia.
Well, when I say Eastern Europe, at that point, it is Russia. It's what was formerly Poland, right? Ukraine, White Russia, but they're all part of the Pale Settlement. They're all owned by Russia at this point. That all happened at the very end of the 18th century. Okay, so let me just continue. Okay, the largest community, where was I up to? Oh, I'm at the top of the page. Now, said the college were abolished in 1844. We're talking about those Hevras. Most of their supervisory functions passed to special synagogue boards. All right, well, we have it today. The board that maintained the full spectrum of Jewish religious observances. They made sure that everything was available within, even as a little tiny little shtetl. The Jewish life, would go on. And the typical shtetl, the rabbi, was both the religious and secular leader, while the synagogue remained the religious, cultural, educational, and social center. I told you how my father was a rabbi in the house, but there was this one lady, actually, she was really, I think she was Iranian. She was, that's her. Like this was some special you know, she calling me the daughter of the rabbi, you know, not by my
okay.
name, just how she disappeared.
You got it time.
I was like being respectful, you know.
No, it's kavod. It's kavod.
It's
It's
like-
like the
Okay, so again, the center of every little shtetl would have been whoever the Rav was, and the shul. The shuls were usually very modest affairs. They're not big fancy buildings. First of all, I don't think they're allowed in some of the communities to have larger buildings. Yet a seat in the shul was highly prized, as it guaranteed its owner the honor of receiving an aliyah on Shabbos or Yontif. So even today, you know, if you go to certain places, you're not a member, you're not gonna get an aliyah. So, you have to pay your dues. Okay. What do they do here? You don't live here year round. Well, maybe you pay less dues if you don't live here year round. No, oh, it's the same.
Same thing.
Oh. Yeah. I have to tell you that at BRS, I mean, I don't know what's now, but I know when I first moved down here, I was just a snowbird. You know, I paid less. Well, sometimes I was paying dues for my shul back home. So, yeah, they didn't ask me to pay the full amount. In any case, again, I don't know what they do nowadays. In the larger communities, okay, this would have been a more established community. There were two types of shul. One was exclusively a house of prayer, right? Where you to go to daven, and the other was actually the Beit Medrash, so it became a a house of study. I mean, again, in a smaller community, the Beit Knesset would have sort of both functions. That's where you would go to study and learn. But in a much more established community, that was could afford it, two separate buildings. And the base measures, they would be open throughout the day for study. And it was also used for social and communal use, all right? In the largest communities, there were many private synagogues, some belonging to the well-to-do, and others maintained by various occupational groups, such as the butchers, the tailors, and even the chimney sweeps. And I believe I learned this from my husband Joel. In Rochester, there were certain shuls there that people, depending on their profession, that was the shul. They went to. I mean, I come from a smaller community, so that's my bad. That same thing. Your comrades, people you had most in common, so they davened together. In Vilna, Vilna, became a huge Jewish community. By the end of the 19th century, there were no less than 110 such establishments. It's a lot of shuls. Okay, now again, these are not necessarily the big fancy shuls, but the fact that
Not a lot of people.
when
that
they-
do
yeah.
it.
110 is Baruch Hashem, somebody counted it to 100.
Well, they must have had the list of the names of the shuls. So that's how they knew.
They did.
That's how a historian works. There are definitely records that are kept.
Yeah.
And also they interview people, who, at this point, there are plenty of people out there. History will now become a more respected field of study, so within the Jewish community as well. And that's how they
That's
get
why I call
their
it Yerushalayim
information.
Belika.
Yeah.
Yerushalayim Belika.
And then there are all these also Hasidic, as they prayer words. And the only thing I remember in Harrisburg, my father was the only, the Orthodox, the Orthodox synagogue. I just had one, two conservative and one reform. But there was another in a neighborhood where Jews really weren't living anymore. It was called Machzike Hadas. And then I think my father told me eventually I grew up. I didn't even know he went there. These were like the descendants of immigrants, and some of them were Chabadniks. That's what that sure is.
Maybe Chabad took it over.
No, nobody lives in a completely black area now. I don't think the shul exists. I'm sure they sold that. So to this day, there's one Orthodox shul. There's two main conservative shuls, and then there's temple. Oh, not in America, no way. The biggest group where I live were the conservative Jews. Oh, in Europe, yes. Well, conservative Judaism did not exist.
That's American.
But even in, we're talking about the Pale settlement, and they were Orthodox Jews. Either you didn't want to observe much of anything if you were a maskil, you remember the Hasid, you belong to the Haskalah. But if you ever, would on occasion go to shul, you say Kaddish, you would go to what was an Orthodox synagogue. Listen, BRS, for example, was founded by South African Jews. Because in South Africa, if you go to shul, it was an Orthodox shul. I guess they didn't have
Because it's with immigrants.
but that this was a genuine synagogue, and it had to be Orthodox. And these were not from people, these South Africans who founded BRS. I'm sure they drove there or whatever, but I guess when they first came, they went to the conservative temple. There were a few in Boca, but they weren't comfortable there. They went to the prayer, the tefillah to be more authentic. Okay. In the years, okay, so I'm now, down here, next paragraph down. In the years before the development of an effective Yiddish press, okay, which will ultimately develop, but that's more maybe into the 19th century, the synagogue served as the information center of the community. Good place, I know, the gossip, what's going on, but even what's going on in Russia itself. The shul also became this center for the collection and distribution of charity, right? You didn't have Jewish federations. It was all done through the shul. Okay. The shul additionally served the community as a semi-recreational retreat, a place where people could indulge in friendly, intimate chats. Or, even everybody's shul's over, the schmooze, and something to have a kiddish. But if you don't have a kiddish, everybody will go outside and talk to one another. Jewish travelers with nowhere to stay could be lodged in the shul's annex, and they would, I thought it was a really small shul, they would just sleep on the bench, But there was always a place where a Jew could go, nobody would be left out in the Pale's tenacious religious tradition was the principal source, both of consolation, tragedy, somebody passed away, and of joy, as we would celebrate. And again, I think those of us who are, Orthodox, it's still, that it still is serving that function, that community function. Let's go on. I still have a few more minutes. Because cultural activities were steeped in the religious spirit, there was literal secular education in the Pale settlement until late in the 19th century. I told you, Haskellahs begin going to stress, how important it is to have secular education, to become more cultivated Jews, which would be then more acceptable within the general, non-Jewish community. And the rabbis certainly frowned upon it because I think they were so concerned that it would turn people away from practicing. And that's why they, did not want it. At a certain point, you saw how the Russian government tries to force this. That we're stubborn people, and very, and they had many years to Rabbanan, and they said no. They were not interested. Even today, it's a lot of the day school will take money, for example, from the federation or even the government, but there's always the fear that they will then intervene with what's being taught, in the school. And here in Florida, especially DeSantis, and that Republican legislature, funds do go to the day schools, but things can change. I don't know. I remember my father, he had a day school and he founded. He collected all the money. He didn't accept, government funds. But education was always crucial and important, within the Jewish community. There is virtually no illiteracy among Russian Jews. Everybody, girls, everybody learned to read. All right. And this learning, it says again, in those days would have been exclusively religious. Do you remember anybody? I remember my cousin's wife. She used to sit in shul. I guess when they were laying, I don't know. She used to take from the center
Center
round.
right,
Yeah,
center
I could still like hear in my mind. She was reading it. Yeah. So, yeah. We had learned about. I can't remember.
You mentioned
But, right, so it was something maybe from the 18th century that someone had come up. It was a way, again, for women, to know the stories, the Torah, it's more palatable, I guess, easier to understand or whatever. So that's what came into being. At the young age of 4, they would embark upon their school career at the Cheder. Actually, I think in some very frum areas, they started with 3-year-olds.
After the sharing.
Yes,
The
I remember being in Mesharim or Geula, I don't know, passing by one of these kind of, and it's very sweet to hear their little voices, the Rebbe says it, the Rebbe repeat it, Or some of them fall asleep, they're little guys, By mid-century, so again, let's say by 1850, there were perhaps 6,000 such schools in the Pale, and about 15,000 belonged. I mean, they needed, for the different grades, you have at least belonged according to 4. Says the average belonged was poor and rarely managed to make ends meet. Of course. Education continued with the Talmud Torah. That would be the next level. That would be the step where actually to me, when I think of Talmud Torah, I think of that, after school programs, and that was mostly for like elementary school age, and some went on into high school, but it's more, elementary school age. And again,
in Europe, it was.
What's that?
Talmud Torah was for the boys.
oh yeah, the girls did not
The girls
have
did not
formal
have-
education. You would have been taught by your mother, or if your parents were wealthy enough, they would have hired, Malama to come to the house, the private room, teach or tutor. But then the highest level would have been the yeshiva. That was attended by a select minority of talented students. Not the heck what's going on, in Israel, right? Actually, it's the religious Jews who are, I think, are so angry with these Haredi because they're sending their children and they are being killed. So these Haredi, and a lot of them, again, I don't know what the percentage is, but a lot of them, they're supposedly enrolled in some of their yeshivas. They're not sitting and learning. I don't know what the heck they're doing, but they are not sitting. And I think the Israeli government is trying to target those, not the ones with serious learners, but those who are really not contributing, to something it means. All right. No definite age limit or formal educational accomplishments mark the end of this pupil's school career. And I guess that's true nowadays for the more promising students. You just sit there and learn, for many years. And then, and they would, the matches would be made depending if they were married, if the father-in-law would help to support, depending. My husband always says, why couldn't I have married a wealthy girl?
What?
A wealthy girl. He married me, the daughter of a rabbi. Let me tell you, the rabbis do not earn big salaries. So.
Married for love, the first.
What's that?
The first time for love.
Yes, right. So only there are 3 issues. There actually are more. I'll talk about them at a later time. So here they're mentioning that there were 3 major issues. I'm telling you there are others. They say all of them were in Lithuania. And I'll give you a map also. This will show you the communities. So one was located in Volozhin, and one was in Mir, and it says one in Vilna. But there's Slobodka. I mean, there are other definitely major issues. I say at a later point, I'll put together a whole packet so you can know that. It says virtually all the students who attended the yeshivas were quite poor. and they were supported by community funds. And they were the ones who would have to find housing someplace, and feed them, they would sleep there. But but if you were in the yeshiva and you were really learning there full time, you had to be, as I say, show that you were a genuine, student dedicated, to your learning. I mean, and others would find jobs. Like they're income.
Those that learned always in the home to come to eat. Because
Yes,
there were
right.
always people
Right.
in state there. They took in all the Bochum there.
Yeah, to take care of them. I mean, again, depending on where you went, I know you always like the food when you're going, or some of those people themselves weren't so wealthy, so the meal might have been kind of, poultry, but whatever. Also, all right, so I see it's past the time. So next, and my granddaughters, I think, will finally get them up. So I am going to finish this next week. And then we're going to go, does anybody have these sheets, or if not, you can hold on to them, it says 19th century Torah masters?
No,
And that was-
no,
So, I have it, what?
those haven't been given out yet.
That was from last, no, it was from last week. No, that's why I was doing that. Well, not quite, I still have to do it. And then next time we're gonna do this, I'll give it up. Something.
Thanks.
The documents. Yeah, it went on and on. So you couldn't leave. I'll be a day. I once gave a lecture here.
They can always have the person. They just said one message.
Oh.
Thank you.
Right.
Yeah. Like, yeah, that's been out there. So you can sit here. You could sit here. I can't. You could sit here and take pictures. Hold on. Yeah.